Hello, I'm Julie Decker, President and CEO of the FSU Alumni Association, and welcome to the 15th episode of our Webinar Wednesday series. Virtual engagement, just like this, has allowed us to bring expert alumni into your homes to provide you with some educational resources, as well as bring some of our wonderful research right to you that's taking place here at FSU. The Alumni Association is so thankful for the continued support and contributions from our Alumni Association members. Becoming a member makes a resounding statement of commitment to the university, our fellow alumni, and the students who will soon join the ranks of our alumni community. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join today. I would also like to thank our corporate partners for your generous support, which makes programs like these Webinar Wednesday series possible. This afternoon, I have the great pleasure of introducing our presenter and founding executive director for the Institute for Justice Research and Development, Dr. Carrie Pettis-Davis. Professor Carrie Pettis-Davis is one of social work's leading experts on enacting data-driven solutions to criminal justice reforms. Her intervention, development, and policy reform work examines racial and economic equity throughout the criminal justice system, from an individual's first contact with law enforcement to their release from incarceration. Her goal is to help individuals, families, and communities impacted by the criminal justice system develop well-being. Pettis-Davis's work has broad policy impact, and her prioritization of rapid dissemination of research findings to policymakers, practitioners, and advocates ensures that data-driven innovations can be implemented in real time. Pettis-Davis has grounded her career in intervention development and testing on strong collaborations with correctional stakeholders, community partners, and individuals with incarceration histories, maximizing both the relevance of intervention content and the potential for effective interventions to be implemented in real-world settings. Pettis-Davis joined Florida State University as associate professor in summer 2018 and find and lead the Institute for Justice Research and Development, a premier multidisciplinary research center located in the College of Social Work. Pettis-Davis is also co-founder of the Smart Decarceration Initiative and co-leads the Promote Smart Decarceration Grand Challenge Network for the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare. Prior to joining academia, Pettis-Davis worked extensively as a social worker in varied mental health and correctional settings. Dr. Pettis-Davis completed a doctorate in social work from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She holds a Master of Social Work Administration degree and bachelor's degree in social work and psychology from the University of Kansas. Welcome, Dr. Pettis-Davis. Thank you for being with us today. We have heard so much about your research, and I look forward to hearing and learning from you today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here as well and talk about a topic area that is very important to me and one that I have worked in pretty much my entire adult life. So I'm going to share my screen to share a PowerPoint with you. And then at the end of the presentation, I'd love to be able to respond to some questions that people may have. So the Institute for Justice Research and Development, like Julie mentioned, was launched here in 2018. And really what our goal, I'm going to try to get this slideshow going, sorry. What our goal is, our mission is, I should say, is really to use science to improve lives. We want to improve our communities, improve our institutions, by coming up with solutions around doing criminal justice differently in the United States than we do right now, and making sure that those solutions are able to produce equity across race, socioeconomic status, and behavioral health status, or otherwise across whether people have mental health and substance use disorders or not. Why, though, is IJRD needed in the first place, which is the acronym I use for our research center? And that is because really as a result of a host of very complicated political and societal factors over the past 40 years, the United States has become the largest incarcerator in the world. And we out-incarcerate other developed countries around the world by a rate of hundreds per 100,000. And research continues to show that this isn't because of differences in criminal behavior across countries, but rather how we've started to over-rely on or overuse our criminal justice system to respond to public health challenges and some other social challenges in ways that other countries just don't do. So that means that these really high incarceration rates have led to is that we have about 13 million people pass through prisons and jails every single year in our country. And that means that because about 95% of people who become incarcerated eventually get released, that means we have over 10,000 people a week releasing to our communities. And even though we use incarceration a lot as a way to respond to public problems and social problems, the intervention of incarceration is not working. We have approximately 77% of people who get out of incarceration are rearrested within 5 years. And if you think about it, just pause for a second, that's a really high failure rate. And if we think about any of our other major interventions in society, medical interventions or school systems, if 77% of people were, failing whatever medical treatment it was, or were not graduating from high school, this would not be an intervention that we would find acceptable as a country. And we are at a place now where our country is starting to question whether this is something that we want to sustain. And part of that questioning that comes with it is, people are wondering, is this the right thing? But then they're also looking at, there's a huge economic toll associated with the way that we do criminal justice in the United States right now. I think people are tiring of the economic burden that's associated with the flaws in our system. It's a bad business model. We're not getting our return on investment. And one of our studies found that when you calculate all the social costs beyond just incarceration itself, there's about $1 trillion in cost to overutilize incarceration like we have to date. And people are starting to have more and more dialogue about the fact that our criminal justice experience is not, people do not experience our criminal justice system in the same way. People experience it differently depending on their socioeconomic status or their race. People of color are substantially more represented in the criminal justice system than white individuals. And that research consistently shows that again, is not a result of differences in criminal behavior. Many studies have found that particularly Black and African American men are more likely to come into contact with law enforcement than white men, despite similar behaviors. And once they come into contact with law enforcement, they're more likely to be arrested. Once they're arrested, they're more likely to be charged. Once they're charged, they're more likely to be convicted. And once convicted, they're more likely to be sentenced more harshly. And once they're released, as you can imagine, the cycle continues. There are also significant disproportionality by socioeconomic status. So if you just look simply at the rate of poverty in the United States, which is around 15%, compared to the rate of poverty represented in the criminal justice system, which is almost 70%. And similarly, because of our over-reliance on the criminal justice system to respond to people who are in mental health or substance abuse crisis, we see a rate of about 3 to 6 times higher behavioral health disorders in the criminal justice system than among the general population residents. So IJRD is dedicated to trying to generate solutions and figure out a way that now that there is a plethora of documentation about the problems in the criminal justice system, how do we respond? What kind of evidence can we give decision makers to make this system smaller, more equitable, and working well? So one of the things that is kind of our unique approach is we are very focused on offering data-driven solutions to a wide range of stakeholders, from law enforcement officers to prosecutors to individuals who are involved in the justice system to heads of corrections and reentry. And we want to make sure that when we're offering data-driven solutions, that those solutions have been tested and are state of the art. So IJRD operates similar to like a teaching hospital, where we both innovate and deliver treatment and services in criminal justice system and and community-based systems. And then finally, we find it is incredibly important that we disseminate our discoveries into the real world as quickly as possible. So you may have heard there is a saying, not an old saying, a data-driven saying, that it takes about an average of 17 years from scientific discovery to adoption of those findings in the field. We really challenge that notion and are releasing research reports every 3 months. So what do we do at IJRD? We, like I mentioned, are very much focused on real world research. This means that our research occurs in prisons, our research occurs in jails, in prosecutors' offices, in community settings, so that we are not just isolated in our own little lab and analyzing data, but rather we are working alongside both the professionals and the individuals that are experiencing the criminal justice system, and we're learning alongside with them what is the most effective way to approach things. So our largest flagship project is called the 5 Key Model for Reentry. This is a behavioral health focused reentry program that we have implemented in 7 states, almost 100 prisons, and are working with individuals that are returning to 21 communities, rural and urban communities across those 7 states, Florida, of course, being one of those states. And what we do is start delivering transitional services for people while they're incarcerated and continue those supports after they get out. So we have actual clinicians or treatment professionals working on the team, as well as team members that are purely dedicated to collecting data and looking at how this model is impacting people's lives. Another example of many of our projects is at the front end of the system, where we have formed a research network of prosecutors from jurisdictions across the country, jurisdictions that identify as more conservative-oriented prosecutors, but also jurisdictions that identify as progressive prosecutors. And across these different approaches, they've come together with our research team to look at how can we really use prosecution as a prevention intercept in the criminal justice system, preventing the use of the criminal justice system to respond to the public health crisis of mental health and substance use disorders, and also preventing people from being pushed into the system any further than they need to be. Instead, looking at opportunities to deflect or divert people from the criminal justice system if their involvement is not warranted. So we work alongside prosecutors to research the effectiveness of their approaches and also to develop new approaches. And we're really making sure that we're having real world impact, that the research that we're doing is able to improve the lives of individuals and families in our institutions and thus ultimately our communities. For example, one thing that we've been working with law enforcement officers on now is the true impact that trauma exposure or the exposure to extremely stressful events can have on people's decision making. And one of the things that we're helping the field to acknowledge is that law enforcement officers are often experience trauma on a daily basis, or the observing of extremely stressful events on a daily basis. And that can lead to trauma symptoms, which include impulsivity or aggression or an inability to accurately appraise danger in a situation. And you can imagine when that occurs, those types of symptoms occur, some interactions with citizens that could have gone in one direction might go in another direction. We also look to make sure that we have, if people are going to become incarcerated, we want to work with corrections professionals to make sure that while they are incarcerated, that they have the opportunity to get better. So we work with prisons across Florida to look at how can we expand our substance abuse treatment capacity. We are working with mental health providers and law enforcement providers to see what are other options for treatment, such as crisis stabilization units for people who are in mental health crisis, as an option to take them there versus going into jails. And again, we're helping to deliver these alternative approaches while also researching the impact of their approaches or their effectiveness. And I mentioned about closing the gap, the 17-year gap that is traditionally occurs in scientific research and adoption in the field. So we are constantly releasing reports. I mentioned we're releasing them quarterly, every 3 months, to make sure that people have a transparent window into what we're learning in the research as we learn it, and providing people options on how they might use this information or use this data to make decisions in their own institutions or communities or policies. And these are always available on our website, and we also communicate them via social media, regular press media, and just about any time I have an opportunity to speak about things as well. And finally, we really find it to be incredibly important that we think about students that are coming through, working at the research center, coming through our courses, that we're looking at them as the next generation, right, of workers in the criminal justice and public health spaces. And they're our future workforce that's really going to help to ensure that any changes that are found to be effective and solutions that are implemented, that they're familiar with what those are and are prepared to adopt and implement those solutions, and are prepared to really enact some work that allows us to address really persistent social and economic problems in our country. So one example of a way that we've expanded on student development while they're in bachelor's or master's programs or doctoral programs is we also created the first of its kind postmaster's fellowship in social work that really works at this intersection of social work and criminal justice. To after people have gotten through coursework, they've graduated, they've gotten their master's degree, to really hone and refine their skills and make sure that they are the leading experts in innovations in this space. We always want to make sure that we are guided by experts as well. So we have a National Scientific Advisory Council that observes and monitors and reflects on and guides all of the science that comes out of IJRD. But equally as important, if not more important, we have a community advisory board that is comprised entirely of individuals who have been incarcerated previously. And we are constantly seeking input and feedback on our ideas or the dissemination of our ideas to make sure that it is making sense, that our work is making sense from the perspective of people who have been through the system before. And we have really been able to, in short time, set FSU apart as a national leader in this area of research. And one of the ways that we do that is we understand that in order for data-driven solutions to be scaled and adopted, we have to have a presence in local communities, because criminal justice work really is situated locally. There's so many variations and laws and policies across states. So we have full-time team members, full-time FSU staff living and residing in states across the country, being able to identify nuances in those states around how research can be adopted, but also making sure that we're not only generating new discoveries that respond to those specific contexts, but that we're able to get information to these specific state and local jurisdictions as rapidly as possible. And a recent estimate looked at, across all of our different stakeholder groups, how many lives are we impacting? And estimated that to date, we've been impacting approximately 1 million lives. So we're really proud to be a part of FSU and have that increased impact since being here. And we're experiencing rapid growth. So this is a picture from our team meeting in February, pre-COVID, where, in our first year, we started, I think, with two staff members and 3 faculty. We now have 5 faculty members and over 80 employees. So we are growing rapidly, and we aim to have a team in every state eventually, and to be able to get more and more tools and resources to the field and decision makers so that we can really see positive, equitable change throughout our country. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my slide share and hopefully allow for plenty of time for questions.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me, Carrie?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. We're getting the video turned back on here. Thank you so much. I have to say, when I first started at FSU in November of 2018, one of the first meetings I had probably within the first 6 months was with Dean Clark, and he sang your praises already of what was happening and what he saw coming with the work that you're doing, and seeing it come to fruition in the way that you've demonstrated is such a point of pride for FSU. What do you wish, or what would you want alumni to know about the work that you're doing and what they can take in their communities to tie back to FSU?
Yeah, I think that's a terrific question. One is because I know one of the things I've learned about being at FSU is that there are FSU alumni everywhere.
Yes.
I actually got a message from my brother who was in Saudi Arabia, and one of our current MSW students was over there and said, I know Professor Pettis-Davis. And I thought, oh my goodness, FSU really is everywhere. So one of the things that I would love people to think about is that we do have a presence in many states. So even if you're not in Florida, still consider us a resource around innovations and knowledge around criminal justice reform and data for that in your communities. The other thing that I would say is, there's been a lot of dialogue lately on racial equity and racial experiencing the criminal justice system by race. Differences in race has been something that we've spent a lot of time examining and a lot of time offering all options for people about how to make that not be the case. And racial equity work and research has been a part of IJRD's entire history, but also a part of all of my work prior to even founding IJRD. So I really would love for people to see us as a resource there as well.
Wonderful. How do you think the events of the spring have impacted your work, the spring and summer? Although I imagine a large part of your focus has been on that very issue that we have seen come even more to the forefront, but has it changed the way, or you work with such speed? I think you said you produce reports every 3 months, and your core competency is your real-time effectiveness. But how do you think that's impacted the work that you've done?
I think so because our work, was already really oriented around making sure that solutions that are generated also increase equity for race across race, economic status, and behavioral health disorders. It doesn't necessarily it's not a new area for us, right? It creates an opportunity for us to say, hey, we've been trying to figure this out, and we have some data that can help you identify what are the best solutions for this in your jurisdiction. But the other piece is, for a long time, I've talked about making sure that we don't ignore the fact that in policy changes or services changes can increase disparities unintentionally. So people are hearing now that when we make changes in our society, we have to look at, does it make equity better or less likely? I think people are able to understand that a little bit more, and also are able to ask us more informed questions around that, which has been super exciting.
That's interesting. I do have a question. They're starting to pop up. So I have 3 here. The first one, I'm very interested in prison abolition. Do you have research or interest in prison abolition?
So prison as abolition is not an area that we work in. I do think that it is an emerging field of inquiry. I'm not familiar with the empirical base around that work, and I think that some people are still trying to really flesh out what that actually means and what that would look like in this country. I can tell you that there is a group that is starting, a group of social work researchers that's starting to form, that you could get access to that group if you just Google Grand Challenges of Social Work, promote smart decarceration, and get on that website. And I think it would point you to researchers that are really forming an evidence base around what prison abolition means and what it could look like.
So you brought up the word smart decarceration. That was one of our other questions. What does that mean? Can you elaborate on that? You talked about that and you mentioned it again. Talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, so smart decarceration is a term that a colleague of mine and I coined back in 2011 or 12, where essentially both of us, Matt Epperson at University of Chicago, both of us had worked in this space for a really long time, and we were starting to see that our prison populations were taking a turn, and they were starting to get smaller, and that really started happening in 2008, 2009. And all of the things that people were typically describing the declines in the prison population around were like, oh, it's the Great Recession, or oh, it's because there's people wanting to save money. There was just, they were trying to justify it in ways that once all of those things started to change and the prison population kept declining, it became clear that we were actually entering a political will and moral will and fiscal will for changes in our criminal justice system that would hopefully permanently keep our prison population smaller. And so we started to think about, well, the fact that what we saw in the juvenile justice system is that in the juvenile justice system, they were able to decarcerate or otherwise, substantially reduce the number of people that were incarcerated in detention facilities, the number of kids incarcerated in detention facilities. But what happened is that the number of kids that were incarcerated in detention facilities did go down dramatically, but the majority of kids that became incarcerated were kids of color. particularly Black and African American kids. So they decarcerated facilities and increased inequities unintentionally, I am sure, but that was the stated goal was decarceration. The stated goal was not decarceration plus ensuring equity. And so we said, well, if we're going to, and so the other example that I'll give you is that we also saw this in the deinstitutionalization of our psychiatric hospitals, where the stated goal was reducing the population by 60%, which was successful, but people with mental health disorders ended up going into jails instead. So we said, if we're going to decarcerate, we have to be smart about it. And that means that the decarceration has to be effective, sustainable, socially just, and that allows for simultaneously downsizing as well as promoting equity across race, social economic status, behavioral health status, and ensuring that we have healthier communities as well as safer communities at the same time.
Very good. Very good. That's amazing. So much of this plays into what you talked, things around trauma and mental health. And I have volunteered extensively for a mental health organization in a previous community, and it played a huge role in that community. What do you see as being the importance of this research going hand in hand in the communities that you're in with a solid mental health outreach beyond, just the local hospital or those types of things? How does mental health and trauma play into your research? Again, you talked about that, but I think that's worth noting a little bit more.
Yeah, so mental health and trauma is infused throughout all of our research because, as you noted, it's critically important. And what we found in both our jail-based and prison-based studies is that about 99% of people who are incarcerated have experienced some type of extreme trauma in their lifetime, and typically multiple extreme traumas. And I mentioned some of the symptoms related to that: aggression, impulsivity, inability to situations, mental health problems, et cetera, that can lead to people not only getting in the system in the first place, but then also keeping and staying in. But like I mentioned with the prosecutors research network, we really work with them a lot around mental health, also to make sure that we're creating opportunities to divert people with mental health problems away from the system if their mental health problem is the driving factor that has got them engaged. And one of the things that, I think because communities have relied so much on the criminal justice system to start treating mental health, is that we have not adequately funded our community mental health supports in communities. And without those community mental health capacity, we're going to have a really hard time keeping people out of the system, either for the first time or for repeat reasons, because like all of us know, especially right now with probably more stress and challenges going on around COVID, is that having good mental health is really critical to stability, work, in school, at home. And when people have several and serious hits to their mental health through trauma or otherwise, it's really going to make it less likely that they're able to be successful and contributing members, positive contributors.
Yeah. It is critical. This is a great question. In regards to FSU's College of Criminology, what changes or benefits will you be able to implement and offer for current or future students, as they will be able to be key to be bringing about the change in the criminal justice area?
Yeah. So yes, and social workers work in criminal justice settings too. But I do want to say that the students that work with IJRD are from all sorts of disciplines. So psychology, communication science, criminology, social work, But in terms of, and we have a lot of dual majors between social work and criminal justice too. So, criminology and social work tend to be different types of research, and criminologists are really excellent at helping to understand the extent of the problem and factors that are contributing to that, and what possible solutions are. And I think where social work builds on that is we talk about how to apply those solutions,
Right.
and the mechanics for applying them. So I think a lot of our criminology students really love to learn, okay, now I have a really good working knowledge of what's going on, and here's some skill sets that I'm getting out of the College of Social Work on how to actually apply those in my day-to-day job, either in criminal systems or correction systems. Settings, not systems.
Yeah, that's brilliant crossover. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I have one final question. Usually the most important question is, what is your favorite part about FSU, or your favorite memory since coming to FSU?
Oh, that is a great question. I have so many favorites. But I worked with a team of staff and faculty and students to put together a $100 million idea. We didn't get the $100 million, but we got close.
Yes.
To really look at how do we come together across our entire campus and offer some really innovative solutions around opening opportunities in our communities across Florida for people with incarceration histories. And all sorts of disciplines who knew nothing about the situation and some who knew lots came together and got really excited and really energized. And we actually even had a community event around it. And it was just so cool to see how much amazing passion and expertise and willingness to kind of just all get in and try to do something fun and cool there was across campus. So it was really awesome. I felt like I'd come to the right academic home.
That's right. I know the feeling. It is the largest place that feels so at home and small in the best ways, I have to say. So that interdisciplinary crossover is imperative for higher education as well. So that's definitely a point of pride. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so appreciative. You are definitely a point of pride in the work that you're doing in the world. 1 million people affected by the work that you're doing, and we're so grateful. For those of you joining us, we hope that you will come back for our next webinar Wednesday on voter awareness, hosted by our Black Alumni Network. Our panelists will bring information on voting rules and procedures to make sure you are fully prepared for voting and ready for Election Day. We hope to see you Wednesday, October 21st. Thank you, and as always, go Noles.